My arrogant boss denied me a massive promotion I had been working 80 hours a week for and gave it to his completely incompetent nephew instead, so I quietly deleted the secret automation software I built from scratch and watched his entire department collapse in less than a week. I worked as a senior logistics coordinator for a massive shipping company, and our department handled hundreds of complex international freight schedules every single day. When I first got hired, the system was an absolute nightmare of manual data entry, so I spent 4 entire months of my own personal time at home coding a brilliant custom macro script that completely automated 90% of our daily workload. Because of my software, our department became the most efficient in the entire building, and my boss Richard took absolutely all the credit for it in front of the executives. When the regional director position opened up, Richard promised me it was mine, but on Monday morning he proudly introduced his 22-year-old nephew Kyle as our new boss. Kyle had absolutely zero experience, wore way too much cheap cologne, and immediately told me I needed to work the entire weekend to train him on our systems. Richard pulled me aside and smirked, telling me to be a good team player because family comes first. I didn't scream or threaten to quit. I just smiled, said absolutely, and went back to my desk. What Richard and Kyle didn't know was that I never actually gave the company the intellectual property rights to my automation script. It was legally registered under my own name and hosted entirely on my personal private cloud server. On Friday afternoon at exactly 5 o'clock, I quietly logged into my personal server, revoked the company access keys, and permanently deleted the software bridge to the company network. Then I turned off my phone and went on a 2-week vacation to Hawaii that I had been saving up for. By Tuesday morning, the department was in absolute complete chaos. Without my custom script, the team had to manually process hundreds of massive shipping manifests by hand. By Wednesday, they were so incredibly backlogged that massive client shipments were being delayed and multi-million-dollar contracts were being directly threatened. Kyle had absolutely no idea how to do the job, and Richard was completely panicking. When I finally turned my phone back on, I had 47 missed calls and countless frantic voicemails from Richard begging me to turn the magic spreadsheets back on. I ignored every single one of them. On the day I returned to the office, the regional vice president was waiting at my desk. He had launched a full corporate investigation while I was gone and discovered that Richard had been lying about his department's efficiency and illegally hired his nephew through extreme nepotism. Richard and Kyle were both fired on the spot and publicly escorted out by security in front of the entire laughing floor. The vice president begged me to restore the automation script and offered me Richard's old job with a 40% pay raise and a massive corner office. I happily accepted, plugged my personal USB drive back into the mainframe, and the entire department was running perfectly again in less than 5 minutes.
My power-tripping HOA president illegally built his massive luxury swimming pool 3 feet over my property line because he thought the rules didn't apply to him. So instead of accepting his bribe money, I legally forced him to hire a demolition crew to completely destroy it with a jackhammer. I bought a house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, but unfortunately it was completely controlled by an arrogant homeowners association president named Richard. Richard treated the entire neighborhood like his own personal kingdom. He constantly issued massive fines to people for having their trash cans out 3 minutes too late or for their grass being half an inch too tall. He absolutely hated me because I refused to vote for him during the annual board elections. Last summer, Richard decided to build a massive $80,000 luxury swimming pool and a custom stone patio in his backyard. For 2 months, I had to listen to heavy machinery and construction noise, but I minded my own business. However, when the massive concrete deck was finally poured, I noticed that his new privacy fence looked way too close to my garden. Richard had always bragged that he didn't need to pull official city permits because he was the HOA president, so I quietly hired a highly expensive independent land surveyor to come out and measure the exact property lines while Richard was at work. The official surveyor used precise GPS technology and hammered steel stakes into the ground, proving that Richard's brand new concrete pool deck and a massive chunk of the actual swimming pool were built exactly 3 feet onto my private property. When Richard got home, I walked over and handed him the official certified documents. He turned bright red, but tried to act completely arrogant. He threw a $500 check at my chest and told me to just take the cash and shut up because the pool was already built and there was nothing I could do about it. He even threatened to fine me thousands of dollars for harassing him if I complained. I didn't yell or throw a tantrum. I just let the check hit the grass, smiled at him, and walked back inside. The very next morning, I took the certified surveyor documents directly to the city zoning commission and a ruthless real estate lawyer. Because Richard never pulled the required building permits and illegally encroached on my private land, the city immediately issued a mandatory unappealable demolition order. Richard desperately tried to sue me to stop it, but the local judge completely laughed him out of the courtroom and told him nobody is above the law. 2 weeks later, I sat comfortably on my back porch, sipping a glass of ice-cold lemonade while I watched a heavy demolition crew use massive jackhammers to completely destroy Richard's brand new $80,000 pool. The loud cracking of the concrete was absolute music to my ears. Richard had to pay $30,000 out of his own pocket just for the demolition, and the rest of the neighborhood was so incredibly happy that they instantly voted him out as HOA president the very next week. When the arrogant president of the local homeowners association illegally hired contractors to chop down my grandfather's historic oak tree because it blocked her view, I used federal tree laws to completely bankrupt her entire organization and bought her own house at the foreclosure auction. I inherited a beautiful piece of land that sat right on the edge of a massive luxury gated community. Because my grandfather built the house 50 years ago, my property was completely independent and legally not part of their tyrannical homeowners association. With the new HOA, President Susan didn't care about facts or property lines. She was a miserable woman who spent her entire life harassing neighbors and measuring people's grass with a ruler. The second I moved in, she started leaving aggressive notices on my door demanding I paint my blue house beige and pay her $500 a month in association fees. I laughed and threw them in the trash. Then she escalated. She slapped a fake $10,000 fine on my front door because my massive 200-year-old oak tree was dropping leaves into her pristine swimming pool next door. I sent her a certified legal letter proving I was not in the HOA and told her to back off. But Susan thought she was an absolute god who was above the law. Last Tuesday, I was at work when my doorbell security cameras alerted my phone. Susan was standing in my front yard sipping an iced coffee while an unlicensed tree removal crew started taking a chainsaw to my historic oak tree. My blood went completely cold. I didn't drive home to yell at her. I called the local police and a ruthless property lawyer immediately. By the time I arrived, the police had already arrested the contractors for trespassing and malicious property destruction. Susan was screaming at the cops, claiming she had supreme authority over the entire neighborhood and could do whatever she wanted. But what Susan didn't know was that destroying a massive historic tree carries insane legal penalties known as treble damages. My lawyers sued Susan personally and the entire HOA board for over $400,000 in damages. The HOA's insurance company completely dropped them because the act was intentional and highly illegal. To pay the massive legal settlement, the HOA went completely bankrupt, and Susan was personally forced to sell her luxury house at a massive loss just to avoid federal prison. I took the settlement money, attended the bank foreclosure auction, and bought Susan's house in cash for pennies on the dollar. I legally evicted her with a 30-day notice while she cried on the front lawn, and now I rent her former dream home to a loud college frat house who throw massive parties in her old pristine swimming pool every single weekend.
When my entitled mother-in-law walked down the aisle at my wedding wearing an exact replica of my custom bridal gown, and my fiancé told me to stop overreacting, I calmly handed him my engagement ring and told the priest to just marry them instead. I had been dating Mark for 4 years, and his mother, Brenda, had the most severe case of toxic boy mom syndrome I had ever seen. She hated that I was a successful corporate director, while Mark worked part-time at a gym, but I loved him, so I ignored all the massive red flags. I paid for our entire $40,000 wedding absolutely by myself because Mark had zero savings. 3 months before the wedding, Brenda begged to see a photo of my custom designer dress, claiming she just wanted to coordinate her mother of the groom outfit. I naively sent her a picture. On the actual day of the wedding, I was standing in the back of the church waiting for the music to change. The massive wooden doors opened for the parents' procession, and my jaw completely dropped to the floor. Brenda was slowly walking down the aisle wearing an exact custom-made replica of my white lace bridal gown, complete with a crystal tiara and a long trailing train. The entire church of 150 guests gasped in absolute horror. I looked down the aisle at Mark, expecting him to be furious, but he was literally smiling at her with tears in his eyes. When it was my turn to walk, I marched straight up to the altar, my hands shaking with pure rage. I quietly asked Mark why his mother was wearing a wedding dress to my wedding. He didn't even look at me. He just whispered, "Stop being a dramatic bridezilla. She just wanted to feel beautiful today, and you are completely ruining the moment." Something inside my brain instantly snapped. I realized right then that I was about to legally bind myself to a spineless man who would never, ever protect me. I didn't scream, and I didn't cry. I calmly reached up, unclasped my beautiful veil, and handed it directly to Brenda. Then I took the microphone right out of the priest's hand. I looked at the stunned crowd and loudly announced that since Mark clearly wanted to marry his mother today, I was not going to stand in the way of true love. I took off my diamond engagement ring, dropped it directly into Brenda's hands, and turned to my side of the church. I told my family and friends that the luxury reception downtown was entirely paid for in my name, and the open bar was ready, so let's go celebrate my newfound freedom. My family instantly stood up and cheered, walking right out of the church behind me. Mark turned completely pale and tried to grab my arm, but my dad shoved him hard into the altar. We had a massive, beautiful party without them. Mark and his mother actually had the absolute audacity to show up at the reception venue an hour later, demanding to be let in to eat the expensive food I paid for. But I had already given their photos to the security guards, who publicly dragged them out of the luxury lobby while all of my friends pointed and laughed.